All right, so a couple of reminders here, guys. First off, okay, your unit exam for Unit 4 is tomorrow. Make sure that you're ready for that, okay? If you guys want, you can come in a little bit early, but I don't think time's going to be a factor, okay? But you can come in a little bit early if you want to in break, so like get here right away at the start of break. Remember, there will be no bells again tomorrow, right, because the diploma exams are going on. So also, that your final exam, okay, June 26th, 9 o'clock in the morning, make sure you get here, okay, before 8:45, because that's when the doors to the gym will open, right? There'll be the whiteboard out front. Check what row you are in. Go to that row. There'll be an alphabetical order on the desks, okay? Go to your test. It'll already have your name on it, okay? Sit down there. When you look at the test, which you won't open until obviously all the instructions have been given and then you're told to start, okay? But inside the front cover will be your multiple choice form and your formula sheet / periodic table, okay? That's where everything will be. I know it's the third time I've told you that, but I'm telling you again. I'm going to tell you every day so you don't forget, okay? Things you need to bring: several pencils, maybe a couple of pens, calculator with a fresh set of batteries. Okay, if you're bringing something to drink, make sure it's in a resealable container. And if you're bringing something to eat, make sure it's an exam appropriate snack. Okay, you don't need a 5-course meal to get through a 2-hour exam. The exam is, remember, 2 hours. That's it. Okay, there's no extra half hour. It's 2 hours. You have to finish the exam in 2 hours. You are allowed to leave after an hour, but if you are done my test in 1 hour, I weep for you. Yeah, okay. No one has finished my test in 1 hour and been successful on it. Not throwing down the gauntlet of challenge with that statement either, okay? Do not take that as a challenge, okay? I did have a person who finished it in 1 hour and 10 minutes and got 98% on it, but they were really, really, really brilliant. But yeah, okay. No, that's the kid who didn't do so well. He took it as a challenge to go, I can be done in 1 hour. He handed in his test after 1 hour, it was less than half done. Well, when you only do less than half the test and you're only here for less than half of the material, that means you're going to get about 15%. Something like that.
Says he got 98% though.
No. The kid that was genius did. The kid who, no. The other kid, not so much. Yeah. Okay. So the stuff in biology that's important. Okay, we started off, okay, with cell theory. All right, how many points were there to the cell theory? 3. There were 3 points to the cell theory. All living organisms are made up of cells. Cells carry out the basic functions of the organism, and cells reproduce by splitting in half or something along those lines. All right, that's what we're looking for. Remember that point number 2 is the most important one. Cells carry out the basic functions. Okay, that's important in many of the answers to do with cell transport, cell structure. All of that stuff relates back to cells have to carry out basic functions. If it's a plant cell, one of the basic functions is photosynthesis. Thus, they're going to need to have chloroplasts, things like that. Right? When you're explaining other answers, you can almost always find a way to work in the second point of the cell theory. Right? So there could be a few multiple choice questions about the cell theory. And obviously, as we just said, it might be something you can work into a few written response questions. Okay, especially along the lines of transport and function. Okay. Sorry, I should have mentioned this before. Remember that studying for biology is different than chemistry. Yesterday we reviewed chemistry and we said the way to study for chemistry was to do lots of example problems and work on your skills. Biology is the opposite. Okay? Biology, you need to tell me what you know. Okay? Apply what you know. That means lots of reading over of the notes. All right, so go over the notes, watch a few podcasts here or there. Okay, look at maybe some of the stuff that was on quizzes. Okay, things of that nature. Those would be good strategies to use. Another thing that I forgot to mention, 2 things actually I forgot to mention in terms of preparing for your final exam. The first one is that on those 2 days where I'm available all day for help, I will have your unit exams laid out in my classroom. If you would like to look over your unit exams, you are more than welcome to do so. Okay, you can't take them from here, but I have to keep them, but you can certainly look over them if you would like to do that. The other thing is remember that your quizzes in PowerSchool are also an important study tool. Okay, if you open up PowerSchool and you click on any one of the quizzes, it'll show you your mark and all that kind of stuff, but it'll also have a link that'll say like quiz 5 questions. If you click on that, it'll take you to that PDF that I posted on Google Classroom the night before the quiz. It has the questions on it. And the other one will be podcast of quiz 5. If you click on that, it'll take you to YouTube and the podcast of me going over the quiz, the answers to the quiz. So a really good way to study would be, okay, try those quizzes again and then watch and see if you got the answers right. Okay, especially if it's a quiz you didn't do so well on. Evan, question?
We have learned the history of cells.
I'm not as worried about history. I'm more worried about the applications of, again, same as chemistry, right? We're not worried about, I mean, Schleiden and Schwann, I mean, they're important. There's only 4 guys in this one, right? There's Hook, Leeuwenhoek, and Schleiden and Schwann.
It's more like, read the notes. So
Yeah. I'm still not too worried about the historical part of it as I am the applications of the cell theory. Okay. In this lesson, we also talked about microscopes and lab drawings and things like that. So just know that there could be a few multiple choice questions about use of the microscope. Okay, and lab drawings. Okay, that would be like estimating size of objects and things like that, right? We said if you're looking through the microscope and you see, that about the specimen you look up takes about half of the field of view, okay, and the field of view is 400 micrometers, then the specimen is 200 micrometers. Okay, being able to estimate the size of an object under the microscope was an important skill that we went over. Okay. Then we talked about modes of nutrition. What were the 2 modes of nutrition? Yeah, chemoheterotroph, right? That's any organism that consumes organic material for food. Whoop, I spelled that wrong. Hetero. There's an extra E in there. Okay, troughs. And what was the other one? Photoautotrophs. Right? Those are any ones that can make their own food using light, i.e. photosynthesis. Okay, the reason we talked about those was because their cells have to carry out basic functions, but that means they have to have different structures. So chemoheterotrophs have some structures that photoautotrophs do not, and vice versa. So there could be many multiple choice questions about the differences between plant and animal cells. Right, so specifically, what's an organelle that a chemoheterotroph would have that a photoautotroph wouldn't? A, lysosomes, B, mitochondria, C, nucleus, D, cytoplasm. Okay, and you have to be able to identify which one it would have that the photoautotroph would not. So things along those lines. Okay, again, checking whether you understand photoautotrophs, chemoheterotrophs. Okay, and again, working that into cells carry out the basic functions of the organism. Okay, it's tied into that. That same day, we also went over parts of the cell. We labeled our cell diagrams. There's a cell on final exam. You have to label it. Okay, I'm not going to tell you which one. There's a cell that you have to label on the final exam. So make sure that you know how to do that. Okay, go over your diagram of the cell that I gave you. Right? Make sure you recognize all the parts. Only one cell. Okay? But again, you don't know which one it is, so you have to know both. Right? So make sure you can label a cell and give the functions of all of the parts. Okay? It's in the multiple choice this time. It's not in the written, but it's in there. Okay? And you want to be able to get those marks. Those are fairly straightforward marks. Okay. Once we did cell labeling, then we did basically functions of the cell. That's where we went over what all the parts of the cell do. And then we went into cell transport. Okay. So functions of the cell, okay, know all of those, and then 5, cell transport. What were the big 3 methods of cellular transport that we went over?
Osmosis.
Osmosis, diffusion, active transports. Okay, so osmosis. All right. I would say there are going to be multiple written response items about cellular transport, and they are very, very much like the ones that were on your unit exam. Okay, so one of the ones on your unit exam had to do with the slugs. Okay, and it said on the front cover of your test is this cartoon about slugs. They were going to the Great Salt Lake. Why was this going to be a vacation disaster in terms of cell transport? And you had to say, well, because of osmosis, this is going to be a disaster, because when the cells go into the Salt Lake, there's going to be more salt outside their cells than inside, and there'll be an osmotic imbalance, which will cause water to move out of their cells and into the lake in order to balance the concentrations, and as a result, the slugs will shrivel up. Okay, that's what you basically had to tell me. I know what osmosis is. I know that this is the situation in which it applies. Here's what's going to happen because here's how osmosis works, and the slugs are going to die. Okay, you had to tell me kind of that stuff. So it would be situational questions like that about the methods of cell transport. So you need to be able to read the question and say, oh, okay, that's active transport, or that's diffusion, or that's osmosis, and then explain how the process works in the context of that question, just like you did with the slug question. All right, so for osmosis, what does osmosis move? Water. Okay, and it moves it where? The reason the slugs dried up is because water moves across the membrane. Needs energy or not? Not. Passive. Okay, and why does it move water across the membrane? What's it trying to do? Balance the salt concentrations, right? Okay, those are the things we need to remember about osmosis, because those are the things that if we saw them or read them in a question, we would know it's talking about osmosis. All right. Diffusion. What does diffusion transport? Anything. Where does it transport it? Well, what's that? Right, from a low concentration to a high concentration, basically within the cell. Okay, like this is intracellular transport. Okay, so that means inside the cell, okay, from high to low. Passive or active? Passive. What's the drawback? Right, doesn't work well over large distances. Okay, how does that relate to another concept we talked about? The fact that diffusion doesn't work well over large distances causes what? Cell size, right? Cells can't get very big because of this. Okay? A single cell cannot become overly large because diffusion would not be able to transport stuff, and then it would not be able to carry out its basic function. See how it works back to cell theory again? Okay, we can always work those kinds of things into an answer. All right, active transport. Well, it's active because it's in the name. Otherwise, it would be a real misnomer. Okay, so it is active. It uses energy. What does it transport? Yeah, solutes, basically anything dissolved in your like intracellular fluid. Okay, solutes is a good word for that. Okay, it doesn't transport really big things. Okay, but it transports dissolved stuff very easily. All right, where does it transport it? Yeah, it's across the membrane, but also which direction? Okay, this one and this one are down the gradient. That one is up. That's why it needs energy, right? It's like pumping water uphill. These ones are letting water run downhill. This pumping water uphill. Okay, we're trying to move stuff from a low concentration to a high concentration. That's not the way things move naturally. Okay, without the use of energy. All right, so this goes from low to high. Okay, so as long as we can remember those things, we should be able to identify what cellular transport process is happening within any given question. Okay, then we went over multicellularity. All right, we talked about why multicellularity appeared, the advantages that it had over being single-celled. Mostly that had to do with size. Okay, but it also has to do with one thing that a multicellular organism has that a group of cooperating cells do not have. Starts with S. Specialization, right? Okay, the example of specialization that we went over were the leaf layers. Should you expect to see that again? The answer is unequivocally yes. Expect to see something about the layers of the leaf because that is our example of specialization in this course. So know things like, the epidermis secretes the cuticle, and the spongy layer helps with gas exchange, and the stomates can open and close and control the amount of evaporation that occurs, okay, and that the guard cells do that by changing shape, et cetera, et cetera. These cells are specialized to do this job. These cells are specialized to do this job. That's our example of specialization. Okay, so be able to explain that within the context of multicellularity. Okay. Then we went over basically plant transport. Two sets of tubes in a plant. What are they? Xylem and phloem, right? What does the xylem transport? Other one. Water. Okay, the xylem transports water. Okay, which direction does that need to go? Up. What processes help do that? Osmosis, right? That creates that cohesive osmotic pressure, okay, that's lifting from above, okay? And what about water? Water has this special stuff, right? It's polar molecule. We got cohesion and adhesion. Whoop, chosesion. That's going to be really an interesting spelling. Cohesion, okay? Adhesion, osmosis, okay? Is that something you're going to need to be able to explain in another question? Absolutely. Okay. Phloem transports then sugar, and what force helps with that? Gravity, right? It's free, so that's what gets used. All right. We also talked about the parts of the plant in that same lesson. Okay, and again, that's more examples of specialization in a multicellular organism. So you'll probably know what the roots and the stem and the leaves do. Okay, what are their roles? Okay, that kind of thing. Okay, plant growth and development was the next thing we talked about. So we looked at plant hormones. Okay, so we talked about auxins, gibberellins, cytokinins, ethylene, and abscisic acid. Okay, those were the plant hormones that we talked about. Those could very easily end up in a multiple choice question with a diagram in very much the same way they ended up in your unit exam in the written response with a diagram. Okay, if you recall in your unit exam, I gave you a picture of two different plants that were both dormant. One was out in the hot desert and the other was in the dead of winter. Okay, and I asked you what plant hormone would cause them to be like that and how it would work. Okay, and the answer was abscisic acid because it disrupts the production of chlorophyll, causing photosynthesis to slow and the leaves to turn and fall off and make the plant go dormant. Okay, so expect something along those lines, but in the multiple choice realm now. Okay, and we also talked about tropisms. Written response item about tropisms. What were the three tropisms we went over? Phototropism was one. Thigmo. That was for touch. And geo for gravity. Okay, so on the final exam, you'll have a picture with a description, just like you had on your unit exam. Here's a picture of a plant, and here's what happened to it. Can you explain why it would have this shape? Right, and you could talk about which tropism it is and how tropisms cause the plant to bend and change their shape. Anybody remember, just for kicks, how that happens? Okay, Luke? Right, one side of the stem, the cells on that side grow faster and get longer than the cells on the other side. Which one of the plant hormones caused that? Auxins, right? Okay, so that would be something you would need to explain. Okay, in a question about tropisms, the mechanism by which a tropism happens would have to be explained. Auxins, differential rate of growth, causing the plant to bend. It's moving towards this for this reason. Okay, those kinds of things. Okay. Yeah, we had a number of things kind of along those lines, but then we also had some stuff about plants and their environment, basically how they interact with other organisms. There's not very much on that on the final, but that was the last thing that we talked about in that unit. Okay, so those are the things in there. Biology probably has the biggest part of the multiple choice. Okay, it would have more multiple choice questions. It does still have, I want to say 4 written response items. I think it was 4, okay, on the things that I've told you there. Okay. All right, questions from you guys? Anything you want me to elaborate on?
Can we go over the cell anatomy?
Like, okay, I have to call up a diagram of that. Okay, so kind of reminders here, right? The little kind of stringy looking or tube looking things that run throughout the cell, okay, those are the cytoskeleton. Right? They help to support the shape of the cell when it's changing shape. You find those more in animal cells than plant cells because plant cells have a rigid cell wall that keeps their shape for them. Okay, the big orange things, those would be the mitochondria, right? They burn sugar for energy. Okay, you got the nuclear membrane. Okay, that's the purple thing around the nucleus. Okay, so the nucleus would be this one here. This would be the nucleolus. Okay, remember that the nucleolus makes ribosomes, and it also copies the DNA and sends it out for instructions for protein synthesis. Okay, these little deals here, the little dots, those are the ribosomes. Okay, the ER that has the ribosomes on it is the rough ER. Okay, its job is to transport proteins. Okay, the ER with no ribosomes is the smooth ER, right? And it has lots of jobs. It makes lipids, it breaks down toxins, it breaks down complex carbohydrates, okay, transports lipids, all those kinds of things. And this here, the outside of the cell would be the cell membrane, right? The animal cell does not have a cell wall. Okay, this would be the Golgi apparatus here. Okay, its job is to package all of the waste products for removal from the cell. What was, sorry, the job of the cell membrane? 2 words. Endocytosis and exocytosis. Okay, this little bubble here that's got the stuff in it would be a lysosome, right? This is food being digested. This one up here would be a peroxisome. Okay, it just has the enzymes, no food yet in it. Okay, this is cytoskeleton here as well. Okay, what are these 2 yellow deals? Centrioles, they help with cell division. Okay, and the fluid that fills up the cell? Cytoplasm, right? Okay, without that, that facilitates diffusion. Without that, the cell will be full of air. That wouldn't be good. Okay, fluid is better because fluid can't expand and contract like air can. Okay. The flagellum. I'm not going to ask you to label that. Yeah, that's what it's called. All right. So for the plant cell, anything that's the same, that looks the same, is the same, right? The things that are different, these green things, which are the chloroplasts, they carry out photosynthesis. Okay, this big thing here, water vacuole. What kind of pressure does it make? Turgor pressure, right? Pushes out. All right, we got the outside. That's the, all right, it's made out of cellulose. Okay, it's a frame. Remember, it's not actually a barrier. It's a frame. Okay, the cell membrane still does the barrier job, controlling exocytosis and endocytosis. And that was it for differences. Okay, everything else is the same between them. Okay. All right, what else? Here? No, it's probably a water vesicle that's headed to join with the water vacuole. In order to replenish the water vacuole, oftentimes vesicles will move from the membrane to the water vacuole. No, in fact, on yours, I think we scribbled that out. Yeah. Okay, what else, guys? Okay. Okay, auxins. Okay. They cause cell lengthening. Okay, they cause the cells to get longer. Right? That's why if you see dandelions that have been sprayed with Killex, they get all long and coily. Okay, that's because it's an auxin. It makes them grow longer, but kind of out of control. Okay, we have gibberellins. Okay, they mostly have to do with development of new shoots. Okay, so a little bit of everything, but mostly to do with new shoots as opposed to existing tissue. Okay, that's why auxins are more responsible for tropisms than gibberellins are. Okay, auxins have to change the shape of cells that are already there. Gibberellins make or determine the shape of new cells, right? So this is in like the very tips and buds and tips of roots and things like that. Okay, then we have cytokinins. Okay, they cause cell division, cytokinesis. Okay, abscisic acid, that is for dormancy. Okay. Okay, it slows or stops the production of chlorophyll. Once chlorophyll production stops, then the plant stops carrying out photosynthesis. It stops needing to transport water, and the plant assumes a dormant state. Okay, and then lastly, we had ethylene. Okay, senescence means it basically signals the plant to die. Okay. If it's an annual plant, you don't see too many perennial plants dying because their fruit ripened. Okay, but if you're talking about something that only grows for one season, like beans or peas or something like that, okay, or tomatoes, they die after they produce their fruit. Okay. All right, so these two kind of go. Abscisic acid goes with perennial plants. That's plants that grow back every year. Okay, once they've produced their fruit and everything, abscisic acid gets produced and they go dormant. Annuals that only grow for one season, okay, they produce ethylene. The ethylene kills the plant. Okay, ripens the fruit. Okay, and in a perennial plant, ethylene will cause the production of abscisic acid. In an annual plant, ethylene will cause the death of the plant. Okay, something along those lines. Right, so that's the hormones. Layers of the leaf, yep. All right, so layers of the leaf go something like this. On both the top and the bottom is the epidermis, okay? Those are transparent cells that contain virtually no chloroplasts. Their job is to secrete the waxy cuticle that keeps water from evaporating from the entire surface of the leaf, okay? It ensures that it can only evaporate through the stomates. Okay, so that's the job of the upper and lower epidermis. Okay, within the lower epidermis, there are the stomates, which are made up of two guard cells. All right, those guard cells, remember that as the plant carries out photosynthesis, more salt starts to build up in the spongy layer. Okay, when that happens, osmosis occurs and water is drawn out of the vacuoles of the guard cells, and that causes them to lose their shape and close off the stomate. Right? It's not a conscious decision. It just happens naturally as the plant uses water or loses water. Okay? It naturally just closes the stomates until it can replenish its water supply. Okay? So the spongy layer is basically just responsible for retaining water and for the exchange of carbon dioxide and oxygen that occurs during photosynthesis. The palisade layer is the layer that carries out the photosynthesis. So it is on the top of the leaf because that's the part that gets the most sunlight. Okay. And remember, you don't need to know the term mesophyll, just spongy and palisade layers are fine. All right, what else? Okay, so thigmotropism works the same way as the other tropisms. Okay, it's going to use auxins. It's just that it's triggered by touch. Right, so a plant can feel something. Not all plants can do this, but some. Okay, it feels the touch of something, and it will grow around that object and use it to support itself. Okay, so if we're talking about like if you're growing peas in the garden and you put a fence next to them, they'll grow up the fence. Okay, honeysuckle, ivy, they all do the same thing, right? They'll grow up a wall or up a fence or up any structure because they detect it's there and they grow like a coiled structure around it to hold on. Yeah, same with photo. It's the trigger that's different. The mechanism is the same. Auxins are secreted to one side to cause the plant to curve. The only thing that's different is the trigger. Yeah. Okay, what else? No, there's just chemoheterotrophs and photoautotrophs. Okay, if you're an omnivore, is probably what you're thinking of. You're still a chemoheterotroph. because you're consuming the organic material from other organisms. Okay, whether you're a herbivore, a carnivore, or an omnivore, you're a chemoheterotroph. No, they're a chemoheterotroph. Yeah. Maybe you're thinking fungus. They're also a chemoheterotroph. They consume the organic material of whatever they're growing on. Okay, there's only two. Okay, what else? Okay, so geotropism, same as thigmo. The only thing that's different is if the plant gets knocked over, okay, it's not going to want to grow straight out from being knocked over. So, okay, so if I've got a tree, right, and it's nice and healthy, and then it gets knocked over by something, so now it's like this. Okay, if it keeps growing out this way, all of its, like, gravity can pull on its entire weight, and it's going to fall. Okay, it'll break off right here or uproot. Okay, so what it wants to do is instead of growing that way, it wants to try and grow back towards its base to balance itself out. Okay, so that's going to be caused by the same process. Auxins will be secreted to the outside will grow faster and curve the tree or plant back over its roots in order to balance it. Okay, it has nothing to do with light. It could keep growing out this way and still get just as much light. Okay, what else? Actually, an example of phototropism to do with this, sometimes when a tree gets knocked over, if it's not able to grow back right away, you'll notice that it only grows branches on the top. So you'll see like there's branches on the bottom and then there's no branches on the bottom past here. It's just, why grow something down there in the shade? It'll grow more on this side as it starts to curve. Okay, other questions there, guys? Okay, well, I will put your final exam review package back up here then. Oh, stream. Okay, so for Unit 2, okay, you got a few questions in there that you'd have to look up in your notes. You got a diagram of a plant cell and an animal cell, okay, as the stuff for that. You may. All right, if more questions come up, just fire away, guys.